I'm going to circle back to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. We talked about it last time, and I only talked about it in one specific, important, but singular context, and it needs to be broadened. Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles to abstain from sinful desires which wage war against your souls. I talked about this sinful desires only in the context of sexual promiscuity and inappropriate, impure sexual pursuits. That is certainly part of this picture. And in the world we live in, it is a very significant part of the picture, and it's undeniable. I don't think I have to make a case for that. And I also don't think I have to make much of a case for the fact that when you've had decade after decade after decade of the promiscuity and the distorted view of sexuality that characterize our culture, there are long-term negative outcomes. There are also long-term negative outcomes for other desires. The thing about a desire that I think we have to start here is that to simply have a desire is not a sin. It's only a temptation. There's a huge difference between temptation and sin. Martin Luther, gosh, how long ago was that? The 1500s, that he wrote, you can't keep the birds from flying overhead, but you can keep them from building a nest in your hair. Well, a temptation is the birds flying overhead. The control I have is over what I do about those birds flying overhead. To have a desire is not necessarily wrong. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say to have a desire is not wrong. To have an urge is not wrong. But what we do about that urge, what we do with that desire can be wrong. And there are good desires and bad desires. There are godly desires and there are sinful desires. And Peter is drawing a line and saying, you will experience sinful desires. And his thing is abstain from sinful desires. Or how do you abstain from sinful desires? Can I just quit having these desires? Yes and no. Let's go with the no first. God has put within us a set of instincts, and I think that the two primary instincts are the instinct for connection with God and connection with others, and the other instinct of self-preservation. These are, in my opinion, the two most powerful instincts that we have. They can be distorted, and this is where our enemy Satan he's focused his resources and all the energies of hell to distort these two, what I think are the primary instincts, inborn, deep, primal desires that human beings have. This desire for connection is good, but isn't the whole sexual aspect of sex outside of marriage in any form, isn't that a broken way of addressing this desire for connection? The desire for connection can denigrate, can degrade, and become pure selfish gratification. Well, what about this desire for self-preservation? Well, it can be broken and distorted when we try and when it becomes more important to us than other high virtues and high values. If self-preservation is our primary thing, then it gets broken when we feel like we're never going to go out of our way to be inconvenienced for someone else's good, because that's not good for my self-preservation. there is no sense of national responsibility in times of war without somehow disciplining our urge, our desire for self-preservation, so that men and women enlist and literally say, my life is available. I will give my life in an effort to protect my home and my country. That somehow there has to be a value in place that overrides this or recontextualizes this urge for self-preservation. You can get into really deep philosophical waters there, but the point I'm trying to make is we have instinctive desires, and honestly, some of them, the primary ones, are gifts from God, but we have an enemy that always wants to bend and distort, even break those desires so that they become bad desires, sinful desires. And Peter's urge is abstain from sinful desires. I'm going to come back to what I said before. Let's look at it in two ways. Abstain from sinful desires. Well, I think a simple way of looking at this is abstain from giving in to those desires. The temptation may be ever present. Our role is to not give in to the temptation, right? The desire may never go away, but to abstain from satisfying that desire, the distortion of that desire as a sinful desire, abstain from acting on that. This requires a lot of self-discipline. This requires that we have a higher value than our own self-interest. And in our world today, what our own self-interest so often comes down to is our happiness. In my counseling world, I so often hear people either using these exact words or implying them, that I just deserve to be happy. And there's just enough truth in that it seems right. There is an error in it, though. And the truth is, happiness truly can be an outcome to be enjoyed in this life. The error in it is that it's the primary goal of this life is to be happy, because that's not the primary goal. If you're a Christian, when you said yes to Jesus on his terms, he became your Savior, and he also became your Lord. One very, very important thing about the Lordship of Jesus is that my desires now have to come under his authority. In his economy, this is hard to get, and I don't want to come across legalistically with this, but it is a principle that we have to somehow integrate into our system of belief, our whole worldview. God's highest interest will never be your happiness. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. His highest interest for you and me is our holiness. And when our holiness is addressed, when we, in partnership with him, here in Peter's words, we abstain from sinful desires. That's an act of holiness, an act of righteousness. And his power makes it possible for us to focus on the refinement of holiness in our lives, so that eventually God, his goal, according to Romans 12:2, is that I would become like Christ. That is the ultimate form of holiness and righteous living in this life. Dear friends, I urge you, as foreigners and exiles, abstain from sinful desires, which wage war against your soul. There are many. If we spent the time, we could go hours on creating a catalog of sinful desires. And I hit what I think, and probably this is an indictment against myself. As I view the world, I think there are several very outstanding sinful desires. One is the sexual desire. A second one is a desire for power. Power is not necessarily bad. There's an old saying, and you're familiar with it: power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I find that to generally be true. When power is my objective, what that implies is there must be something over which I have power, or someone over which I have power. That can be good or it can be bad, and it has everything to do with the application of it. In our world, there is a lot of power seeking, and much of it is not altruistic. It'd be easy for me to start throwing rocks. I can throw it in any direction and hit something or someone who has distorted the virtue of altruistic power. A second one is wealth. Is there anything wrong with wealth? Don't mistake what Paul wrote to Timothy. He did not say money is the root of all evil. What he said was the love of money is the root of all evil. Money is only a tool. It's only a thing. Just as power is only a tool, it's only a thing. How we administer it, how we steward it, what we do with it is what matters. And if one of my driving passions is to acquire more and more and more, I'm not sure that is consistent with God's design. I think it's not wrong to have nice stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. But if I let the desire to have nice stuff become more important than my desire to honor Christ, serve others, to be able to be generous toward others in need, that's where this fuzzy moving line resides. I just always want in my life to be able to, I hate to admit this, but to be able to be comfortable and meet my obligations and not have to hold my breath from paycheck to paycheck. I don't think that's wrong. But if I forget, there's several things here. One is I can never forget that God is my provider. What he provides for me may come from lots of different human sources, but he is my provider. I don't care who writes your check. I don't care where your income comes from in the earthly sense. God is your singular provider. And if you lose track of that, you've cheated yourself out of the most important perspective. First of all, God is my provider. Secondly, I don't own any of this stuff. I'm only a steward. And so the point is, manage it well. Remember the story of the talents, and it's a great story. One guy got 5 talents and he doubled it and got 10, brought 10 to the master. And when that happened, the master said, "You have been faithful in a little. I'm going to make you responsible for a lot." And then there was a guy with 5 that had 2 talents and brought back 5. And the same scenario, God, the master, who in the parable is pretty obviously God, is very pleased, and there is a sense of reward in that. The guy that got 1 took it out and buried it. And when he brought it to the master, he said, "I know you're a hard man and you reap where you don't sow, and so I didn't want to lose it. I just buried it." And the master was very unhappy with him. You could put it in the bank and drawn 0.5% interest, but you chose to do nothing with it. That story it provides us with a principle. We are made stewards. We are made managers by the owner. So these big ideas of the desires that come to us, we have to decide what we will do about the desire. Will we go with it? Which can, if it's a sinful desire, if you go with it, you're going to sin, and that will separate you. That will sin always separates us from God and our perception of our experience with Him. These sinful desires are at war with our soul. You can never finish living a life examined, living your life observationally, and choosing to say yes to God's design and no to sinful desires. Abstain from sinful desires, Peter writes. Well, that's a mouthful, and you know what? I could have gone about an hour longer. I did go a minute past and some. I apologize. Thanks for being part of Soul Care with Stevie. Boy, I'll look forward to when we get together this way again.